cellmates who hadn't spoken to their families at all since they'd been arrested in the August. You know, they were overwhelmed with joy. You can imagine ringing out of the blue with their parents in Germany, and I sat there and I was very happy for them, but I was cursing myself because it had been my daughter's birthday a few days earlier, and I was desperate to ring home. And one of the German girls went to Mr. Afghani and said, please, let Yvonne call home. And he said, we can't. She's a horrible woman. She spat at us and she has to be punished. And that, as I say, is how they punished me, which I think showed great wisdom on their part. A few hours later, Mr. Afghani and a couple of guards returned, and they told me to get my belongings. I was leaving. And they took me out. I didn't even have time to say goodbye to the Christians. And they took me out, and I thought, well, this is it. I'm probably going to be executed now. And they took me upstairs into the Taliban sleeping quarters, and they took me to the end room, which had belonged to a senior officer, and he had vacated his room. And they said, tonight you will stay here, and tomorrow you will go home, inshallah. I said, what is this inshallah that you put on the end of every sentence? Because it never happened. Of course, I now know inshallah means God willing. And so they went off. And I'm sitting on the end of this bed. I got out my cigarettes, and I had a real dilemma because I only had one match left. And I lit up and smoked about 3 or 4 cigarettes until I was really feeling sick. And then there was this huge explosion. I can only, if you could imagine somebody ripping open the sky, that's what it sounded like. And the sky just lit up in this white colour. And it was the start of the war. That night, Britain and America dropped more than 50 cruise missiles on Kabul alone. And you can hear a cruise missile from 20, 25 miles away. These were coming within a quarter of a mile of the prison. Now, it really concentrates your mind when you're bombed by your own country. And I don't know why it had never occurred to me before, but nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Bombs don't discriminate. They can't tell military from civilian, man, woman, child. They can't tell nationalities. I thought, I'm going to be blown up by my own country. And even if I don't get killed by British and American bombs, there is no way that the Taliban are going to let me go now. That's if I really was going home tomorrow. But the next day, against all the odds, a people carrier came. I was put in it, and I was driven down 7 hours back to Torkham, to the gate, which was opened. And before the gate opened, though, we were there for about 10, 15 minutes. And I even then thought, they're playing mind games. They've taken me all the way here to pretend that I'm going, and they're going to lock me up somewhere else, or they're going to execute me. But after 15 minutes delay, the gates opened, and they drove into no man's land. And the people carrier door was opened, and the Taliban diplomat turned around and he said, you are free to go. And I'm thinking, I just really couldn't believe it, but I still couldn't trust them. And I remembered reversing out of the people carrier so I could still keep my eye on them. And I came out of the people carrier backwards. And then I started to walk away. And as I walked away, the media were waiting for me. And they were shouting, how did the Taliban treat you? And I'm thinking about this as I'm walking towards the media. And it was only at that point of freedom that I realised that they had been decent and honourable and respectful in their treatment of me. And I wanted to turn round and go back to say, look guys, I'm really sorry. But I thought if I turn round and walk back towards them, they will shoot me, because I don't know who was happier to see me go, me or them. And I got to the media and they said, how did the Taliban treat you? And I said, with courtesy and respect. And they just looked. This is not what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear about the torture. They wanted to hear about the gang rape. They wanted to hear about the burns, the sexual abuse, the degradation. They wanted to hear all of these tales. In fact, every single thing that came out of Abu Ghraib, that's what they wanted to hear. And in truth, I thought that everything that had happened in Abu Ghraib, in Bagram, in Guantanamo Bay, I would have thought, before we knew of all those atrocities, I really thought that that would have happened to me, which often prompts me to say, thank God I was captured by the most evil, brutal regime in the world and not by the Americans. Not a popular thing to say, but that is the truth. I then got to London and I started to think about the whole experience, and I thought, well, they kept their word against all the odds, so now I'll keep mine and I'll read this Holy Quran. But the other thing was, as a journalist, going into an area where this faith was clearly a way of life, it was shocking that I knew so little about Islam. How on earth could I report effectively about events in the Middle East and Asia if I knew nothing about the faith? And so, apart from fulfilling a promise, I also did it for professional reasons as a journalist. And so I set about reading the Quran. I was given a copy, an English translation by A. Yusuf Ali, and there was an index in the back. And I thought, I'm going to make this easy. So I'll read all of the women's issues first. As a feminist, I was, obviously very interested in the women's issues. And I went right down the index. And I'm looking for the chapter on how to beat your wife without leaving any marks, how to subjugate your daughters, how you don't, I didn't find that. But what I did find was that the Quran makes it perfectly clear, crystal clear, that women are equal in spirituality, worth, and education. Furthermore, women were praised for their childbearing and child-rearing abilities. And not only does it say that we're equal, I'm thinking this is saying that we're the deluxe model of the human being. I quite like what I'm reading here. Couldn't find anything on women being servile or lesser than men. I then began reading supporting literature. I started reading biographies of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Couldn't believe that this perfect man existed, so I started reading biographies written by non-Muslims about him as well, just in case I was being, blinded with propaganda or whatever. Every book that I was reading, this